In the farmhouse near the forest, the brothers secretly gathered at night and decided to go to the forest in the morning in search of the extraordinary magical bird. In the sunny morning, the siblings met a short man and told him about their journey to the forest to search for the legendary bird. The short man asked to accompany them on their journey, but they refused his request. Despite his insistence, they tried to convince him that traveling through the forest was difficult and that his short stature would not endure the hardships of the trip. Without hesitation, the siblings headed towards the forest, leaving the short man behind, watching them from afar. They were joyful as they moved between the forest paths and trees, guided by the map that would help them reach the location of the legendary bird. The forest through which the siblings wandered was breathtaking and beautiful. Its trees were tall, with green, lush branches and dense leaves. Warm rays of sunlight filtered through the branches, and everything about the forest exuded peace and tranquility. As the brothers were enjoying the beauty of the forest, the short boy held the magical feather in his hands, gazing at it. After deep thought, he decided to follow his 5 brothers without them knowing. The magical feather in his hands acted as a guide, helping him track his brothers' footsteps. Once he was sure of the path they had taken, he began to walk cautiously so they wouldn't see him. To be extra careful, the short boy hid among the thick trees to ensure that none of them would discover or sense his presence. The brothers continued wandering through the forest until sunset, when the forest was cloaked in an orange glow, signaling the end of the day. As the night began to settle in, the brothers discussed among themselves where they would sleep. After some deliberation, they decided to camp by the riverbank so the water would be close to them. They set up camp by the river and lay down beside it, where the moon's bright, clear light seemed to act as a guardian watching over them as they drifted into a deep sleep. The water next to them was calm and still, and the forest trees surrounded them on all sides, like protective walls. The children turned in their sleep with peace and tranquility, as if they were sleeping in their own homes. At that very moment, the short boy was still awake, sitting in a secluded corner of the forest, watching the sleeping children from afar. He had a feeling that sleeping on the riverbank might put them in danger, so he decided to act as their guardian, even though they had rejected him from joining them. But in a part of the river, which appeared calm, the water began to stir in a strange way, as if it were a trembling body. This tremor was a watery message sent by the river to the Water King, who dwelled within it and ruled over the entire forest. Indeed, the Water King received the message. He was an unnatural monster, with eyes like flames of fire, and his appearance was terrifying. The Water King remained somewhat calm as he deciphered the watery signals, realizing that some strangers had entered the forest without permission and were now sleeping by the river, threatening his kingdom. As the king grasped the message's meaning, he began to feel anger, and the features of his face twisted with rage. This threat required decisive action. The Water King stood on his feet, ready to crush the sleeping children. He was a massive creature, with long fins on his back like towering mountains, his frame filling the sky. His tail was long and curved, and the claws on his hands and feet were large and sharp, like cutting swords. The giant stood with the stance of one who had full control over the kingdom. Suddenly, without warning, the monster dove into the river and breathed his scorching, furious fire into it. He rose again and let out a roar, understood only by nature, ordering the Minister of Stones to rise from his slumber and move toward the children, so that the water would surge and drown them while they slept unknowingly. He also commanded the forest trees to move with all their might to capture the short boy, thus eliminating all the invading strangers. In just a few seconds, the giant, the Minister of Stone, awoke from his deep slumber and began walking with his solid body on his strong legs. He bent down and commanded the stones to move toward the place where the sleeping children lay. The river stones responded to him with incredible speed. They were living stones, communicating with each other through water messages, unheard by anyone. As soon as the news spread among all the stones in the river, they started to tremble little by little, moving from their places and shifting through the waters, causing ripples in the river. These were massive and powerful stones, knowing no mercy or compassion, with one path and one goal: to eliminate the foreign children. In just moments, the water began to rage, transforming from gentle, sweet water into a violent force, ready for its sudden and powerful attack on the sleeping children. On the other side of the forest, the short boy was still sitting awake, guarding his sleeping brothers on one side and enjoying the beauty of nature at night on the other, with the sight of the moon illuminating the forest. However, he was unaware of the turmoil in the river and could not imagine that the forest maid had commanded the trees to move toward the sleeping boy's camp. Suddenly, without warning, the short boy began to feel a strange and mysterious movement creeping through the forest among the trees. This odd movement was like a warning bell for him, as the trees were secretly communicating with one another. It didn't stop there. They began to move slowly, changing their positions and shifting from place to place. Even the branches started to intertwine and connect, while the tree trunks transformed into human-like bodies, standing and moving, with eyes that watched every detail in the forest. Like a flash of lightning, the short boy stood up, approached the river, and held the magical feather in his hand, raising it high. It was a strange and wondrous feather, glowing with an intense light. As soon as he lowered his hand, the feather ignited and began to hover above his head, spinning around his body from above. This movement of the feather was a counter-message to the river's water, and within moments, the effects of the magical feather appeared on the river. The water started to slow down little by little, seeping from one chamber to another, while the stones stopped moving, losing all their life and dynamism, becoming like lifeless, dead corpses. Then, the water turned into icy water, slowly flowing over the stones, spreading in all directions. Because of this surprise that paralyzed the movement of the water and the trees, the Water King, a giant monster, felt as if he had been tricked. He began walking on the ice, choosing the easiest path, which was the moving water, and used it as a guide to search for the short boy. As expected, the Water King reached the bank where the short boy stood. It was a strong confrontation between them. The monster tried to convince the short boy that he was defending his kingdom against intruders and didn't want to harm him, but the clever boy, knowing the monster was trying to deceive him, thought of a counter-trick. He offered the monster a fiery piece of the magical feather, and the monster took it, thinking he had captured the magical feather. But within seconds, the monster collapsed into the water, and his body froze solid, surrounded by ice, as if he were a bound prisoner. Thus, the monster realized he was completely paralyzed, losing all ability to act, marking the victory of the clever short boy over the monster who relied on his physical strength. While the brothers were fast asleep on the peaceful and calm riverbank, dreaming happy dreams under the bright moonlight, feeling safe and secure, the giant monster, king of the water, was still bound by snow and ice far away in the river, unable to walk or move. As the warm rays of the sun began to rise, the forest appeared beautiful and still, with no movement among the trees. In the morning, the short boy met with the brothers and told them about his nighttime adventures with the monster, king of the water, and how he had saved them from a near drowning in the river. He also explained how the trees would have closed in on them while they slept because they had entered the kingdom of water without permission. When the short boy asked to accompany them on their journey, the brothers thanked him for his kind deed and noble gesture, but they apologized, saying that he would not be able to endure the hardships of the journey and the search. The short boy accepted their apology without expressing his strong desire to join them. After they bid him farewell, he stood for a while, watching them with his bright eyes, sorrow evident on his face. He then turned and began taking heavy steps through the forest trees, feeling broken and sad. Walking alone, he made his way back home, dragging his feet with difficulty, silent and puzzled by the brothers' behavior, despite the sacrifices he had made for them during the night with his magical feather.